I'd like to give you by WFP Director for Northern Ethiopia, Adrian van der Knapp, to the BBC this weekend, in which he claimed that famine had been averted in Tigray due to a sustained flow of aid coming into Tigray following the humanitarian truce in late March. Is it the government's assessment that the level of aid that has reached Tigray over the past few months will have such a significant impact as to avert famine in the region? Has your government held discussion with WFP officials on the possibility of retracing this statement? And my second question is, you recently made a statement to AFP that your government has already named negotiators that will be representing Tigray in upcoming peace talks. Can you tell us more about them? Is there a possibility that civil society organizations and opposition party leaders will be represented? On possible negotiator to the peace talks, your government has said that it has reservations on the leadership of the AU and says it prefers Kenya-US-led process. Would you say this somewhat neglects EPRDF's policy that was centered on Africans' institution and statesmanship? And the Ethiopian Government Communication Service Ministry in its briefing has said the peace efforts are getting hampered by the government of Tigray and its ruling party, TPLF. Can I ask you how far the government of Tigray has gone to end this conflict peacefully? The blockade on vital services is still ongoing and continues to hamper humanitarian response efforts on the ground. Can we expect that a negotiation process can start to take place before the restoration of these services? Can you imagine a mechanism that can be put in place to ensure that if these services are restored, that they will not once again abruptly discontinued? The Ethiopian government has announced that it has signed an agreement with the UN OPS to rebuild infrastructures affected by the ongoing conflict. Do you have a sense that this includes vital services such as telecommunication and electric power? And can we get an idea of the amount of aid that is being delivered into Tigray currently? Do we have a sustained and regular flow? Or if there has been any decline and on the availability of fuel, and that's continued to be a hindrance for humanitarian response in Tigray? And we are now in planting season for farmers. Almost all farmers in Tigray have not had access to necessary agricultural inputs for a successful harvest season. FAO has said this is going to exacerbate the humanitarian situation in the coming year. What has your government done to address these challenges? Is there any likelihood that farmers in Tigray will be able to get necessary inputs within the appropriate time frame?
With regard to the BBC news item quoting WFP official Adrian on the claim that humanitarian aid so far that has so far been distributed to recipients in Tigray has helped avert famine, I would say it was more a slip of tongue than something that was seriously made. In fact, Adrian has made very critical comments on the sort of challenge WFP and other aid agencies are facing with regard especially to distribution of food from the capital Mekelle to the recipients of aid in many parts of Tigray, mainly because of lack of fuel. And so it was a disservice to his considered comments that that statement, which I believe was a slip of the tongue, was made. Otherwise, it was clear that he didn't mean famine was reversed, because as things stand, famine is still raging. So our officials have communicated. He has also communicated this to. It's not just WFP. Obviously, is a very reliable partner, and they are in the thick of the problem. So, whatever remarks were attributed to them were made to make more noise than they did deserve, because journalists tend to highlight the most sensational aspects of one's interview. And I think when all is said and done, WFP and its officials realize that there is a lot more that needs to be done in order to reverse famine in Tigray. And they know what they have done so far, while it is encouraging considering the kind of challenge they had been facing, is, however, a far cry from the kind of the magnitude and the enormity of the problem that the people of Tigray are facing. So we're not particularly worried that such an assessment would be considered the sweeping conclusion by the WFP, both at the headquarters or here in Mekelle. So we understand. We now understand how his words were quoted out of context. Second, with regard to my statement, my remarks to Agence France Presse, I made it abundantly clear that the government of Tigray had already communicated to our partners on the 14th of June that we are ready to send a delegation to Nairobi. And it was after our declaration that the Prosperity Party said it had set up a committee to lead the negotiations with Tigray. And there is some gullibility on the part of some corners in the international community to assume that the fact that the names of the potential negotiators of the Prosperity Party was listed did amount to seriousness on the part of the Abiy government to really sue for peace. But it was obvious even by the international community standards, some of the things which even themselves have been pushing for by way of confidence building measures, such as the resumption of services and the unhindered and unfettered access to humanitarian aid without any encumbrance whatsoever. These are the kinds of things that have hardly shown sufficient progress. And simply because you have a list of people who currently serve in the government, actively serving the government, even the Prosperity Party didn't bother to submit the name of the team to its cabinet, at least, as part of some kind of window dressing there. It didn't submit its names to the parliament. Whether it feels the need to, that's not my headache, but for some corners in the international community to assume that the very fact that they know the names of the people who would potentially participate in negotiations, the details of which have not yet been settled. Where are you going to go? Who's going to facilitate the process? These are issues. How about services, which cannot be subject matter of any negotiations? This have been, the international community has been making a clarion call for the resumption of services as a gesture and as a confidence building measure to sort of to goad us into talks proximity talks. These are the kinds of issues we still cry out for explanation, cry out for answers. And yet, so we were asked if we have a negotiating team. Yes, we have a negotiating team. We'll be ready to send a negotiating team. And we had already communicated this to the international community, to our partners, probably weeks ahead of the Prosperity Party. So we don't believe the list of the people who's going to participate is of relevance at this point in time. Further, there are things that need to be taken care of first. More importantly, whether the kinds of things that should have been done in order to show that the parties are really serious about peace are in fact done. As far as we're concerned, we have done everything in our power to show our readiness for peace. We have withdrawn from areas we were asked to withdraw. We haven't sent a contingent to attack any enemy territory or anything. In fact, there has been some indications by especially Amhara expansionists to try and entice us into action. To a certain extent, we did take some limited action, but we did avoid full-scale confrontation in consultation mainly with military top brass of the prosperity government. So we have done everything as far as we're concerned. The ball is in their court to show us that they are indeed serious. Now they are standing in the way of unfettered humanitarian access by withholding fuel. It's not their fuel. It was a month ago that Abiy's government said it has given clearance for the USAID and WFP to import fuel at their own expense. And it was simply meant for international communities' consumption. It was only meant for cheap diplomatic consumption. That move was welcomed, but nobody seems to bother to point out that that fuel hasn't come, because apparently the finance minister writes a letter in support of the importation of fuel, and the customs ministry stands in the way. Give me a break. We're not talking about different governments we're talking about different departments with the same government working at cross purposes. For all intents and purposes, we hold the government responsible for standing in the way of progress, because they are not serious about their commitment to humanitarian aid. Now you have warehouses full of food in Maqala, but there is no fuel that the WFP or CRS can use to distribute food to the area where it's needed most. So with regard to negotiation team, yes, we have a negotiation team. Whether that negotiation team is going to increase in number or involve other members, we will try and make it as representative possible. I cannot rule out the involvement of the cross-section of society or representatives of the cross-section of society, including the opposition. So I don't think it's necessary for us to give the list of people who are going to be involved. We'll definitely use proper channels to inform our public, and of course to consult on the wisdom of doing so with our public, and we'll be using proper channels when the time arrives. But as far as the international community goes, to assume that simply giving out, providing a list of people without having done your part of the responsibility to create confidence would amount to a clear gesture for peace, that's plain naive, and that is something I want to comment on. Yes, in our letter dated 14th of June, we have President Debrecen has clearly expressed reservation on AU. This doesn't indicate our reversal of long-held position to find African solutions for African problems. We still believe in African solutions to African problems. But we can make a very legitimate distinction between Africans who have the legitimacy to deal with African problems and Africans who lack the legitimacy to deal with African problems. For us, the African Union Commission gave its blessing to Abiy's euphemistically characterized law enforcement operation, which was a genocidal campaign against the people of Tigray, with the support of a motley crew of enemies who had an axe to grind against the people of Tigray with the government of Tigray. And they have not retracted that position yet. And for an institution that has clearly given blanket support for a genocidal campaign to facilitate a process that is meant to end that conflict, that genocidal campaign, that would be the height of irresponsibility. That's what we said. But we still believe African Union can have a role. What I'm saying is African Union can have a leading role. So what role it would have, let those Africans responsible, more legitimate Africans who we believe can deal with this issue and can mediate this issue, can facilitate this process, decide in consultation with the AU itself. That's our reservation. So simply because African problems need to be resolved by Africans doesn't mean that the very people who were involved in the creation of the problem in the first place should be involved in resolving it, in mediating it. Yes, of course, people who are involved in creating the problem should be involved in reversing it. That's why we are ready to negotiate with the Abiy government, although we know every responsibility for what has happened in Tigray is laid under its feet. What has government of Tigray done for peace? Well, I can give you a list of things we have done. First and foremost, we have been calling on the Abiy administration to support peace, not just now, even before the eruption of hostilities. Around March or April 2021, we declared our intention to end the conflict peacefully. It fell on deaf ears. And then when we took Magala, we announced our readiness to address the problem peacefully. And of course, we withdrew our forces from Amhara and Afar. And of course, we have observed the unilateral cessation of hostilities since it was declared back in March. We have given our guarantees that we will not be the first to shoot and will be ready to send a delegation to negotiate for peace as long as those confidence building measures that the international community has been calling for. And of course we have also another demand, which is for the central authorities in Addis Ababa to ensure that the status quo ante is restored with regard to the status of Western Tigray, that IDPs from Western Tigray need to be returned, local administration need to be installed, the kinds of things we've been calling for. That hasn't happened, so we have done our part, and we expect this to be reciprocated, and seriously so. But unfortunately, most of the behavior in Addis doesn't seem to indicate there indeed a seriousness on the part of the leadership in Addis Ababa. With regard to services cannot be negotiated. It is abundantly clear. I mean, the world has made it abundantly clear that the issue of services cannot be a subject matter for any negotiations process. And the resumption of services in Tigray is long overdue. Why would people who would have survived the kind of famine that's claiming their lives, if they had access to their bank accounts, why would they be allowed to die needlessly? Why would the international community have to distribute food to people who could otherwise have made a living simply because they don't have access to telecom, they don't have access to banking services, they don't have access to trading services and all those things. These are things that should have been done well over a year ago. They haven't been done. and we still, when Yanis Lenarčič, the crisis management head of European Union Commission, came to Maqala, one of the things he asked President Debretsion was whether we would furnish guarantee, security guarantee to people, technicians who would come from the central government to restore services. And why would the government of Tigray stand in the way of the restoration of services? So he gave him his guarantee, he gave him the assurances that they would be treated with the kid gloves. And obviously they were playing games, okay? So it hasn't been done since. Even if they were to restore those services, there has to be, of course, assurance that they would not be abruptly cut off again. But I cannot rule that out, judging if the behavior, their behavior in the past is any guide. With regard to World Bank's decision, we have three issues here. First and foremost, the fact that the World Bank had the audacity to re-engage a genocidal government on reconstruction purposes is mind-boggling. It is even more mind-boggling when you realize that what is being discussed is reconstruction. Reconstruction in the midst of an ongoing war. In the midst of an ongoing war where, despite assurances of readiness for peace, the authorities in Addis Ababa have a long way to go before they could sincerely show their sincerity to sue for peace. And so we believe that the failure of the World Bank to take the problem seriously enough is something that we would like to express our concern. In fact, we don't have direct communications with the World Bank people, so we have informal communications. So we were asked to suggest amount and all that. In fact, we did describe the level of destruction that was visited upon Tigray. This was not just a question of assessing collateral damage as a result of civil war or something. This was something that was systematically orchestrated, not by the Addis Ababa government, but also by its partners in crime, the Amhara expansionists and the Eritrea regime. Pekka Haavisto, the foreign minister of Finland, was on record saying that he was told by Abiy and company that they would bomb Tigray back into Stone Age. This is pretty much the plan and the design. And for the World Bank to treat this as just an ordinary collateral damage that was a result of some artillery fire going awry, that I think is very irresponsible. And second, to assume that the authorities in Addis Ababa, who have used every penny in foreign currency to foot the bill of the war, would take this opportunity to engage in reconstruction. That's also equally bizarre. And it would require maximum level of naivete on the part of the World Bank officials, or downright complicity with the authorities in Addis Ababa, to trust the regime with such a serious task. And everybody knows that the authorities in Addis cannot be trusted with a cookie jar. And it's another concern for us. Third, even if UNOPS were to do whatever it has been contracted to do in Tigray, how the hell is it going to understand what the aspirations of the people are, what the priorities should be? Obviously it has to work through the Tigray government, right? And this rather unnecessary focus on protocol, when in actual fact people are suffering on the ground, is another area of concern. Having said that, we'll continue to engage the World Bank. We want to get our message across that the fact that it has decided to disperse money is going to be counterproductive to the peace efforts underway in the country, that this will send a wrong signal to the authorities in Addis Ababa that they have been absolved of their sin, and that they can get away with every crime they might have committed, they may have committed, and they have committed. So this is something we will continue to voice, not just voice our concerns over, but more importantly express our opposition to. Whether this would include vital services such as electricity remains to be seen. Honestly, I haven't. I just perused some of most of it is about the schools, clinics, and it also has a component on gender-based violence and all that. It's mind-boggling. My understanding is that the money they say they have earmarked for Tigray is significantly lower than what they have earmarked for Afar. It's very unfortunate that they seem to be reading from Abiy Ahmed's talking point. It's very unfortunate. With regard to access to supply, regular supply of aid, there was an uptick in supply, especially end of June. The second half of June, there was an uptick. It was significant, although it's a far cry from the kind of challenge, the enormity of the challenge we continue to face in this regard. But the traffic has gone down significantly, especially since the beginning of July. I know there was a slightly significant increase the last 2 days, but the fact that fuel is being strictly denied simply means, and of course in addition to restriction on fuel, the clearance issues for convoys has now once again become a problem. We'll continue to engage the UN agencies and our partners, and through our partners, the authorities in Addis Ababa, that this is an area which could mean the difference between sticking to the COH agreement or not. So we want to give peace every opportunity because our people need the supplies. The supplies are not being provided by the authorities in Addis Ababa. So as long as we see our people are benefiting from this, and as long as there are efforts on the part of the international community to force the leadership in Addis Ababa to relent on its chokehold on services and to express its readiness to restore status quo ante in Western Tigray, will still continue to consider the possibility, however slim, of the peaceful resolution, at least the start of negotiations Otherwise, indications are that there appears to be a systematic effort to stand in the way of progress on humanitarian areas and access issues. Fertilizers, we need fertilizers in a timely manner. The information I have is that although a small amount, part of the convoy that has arrived yesterday has fertilizers as well. So we'll see what the amount is. I don't have the specific figures, but we know FAO has earmarked relatively significant amount of money for the importation of fertilizers, and our people need it. Some of the fertilizer is obviously is past its sell by date, in the sense that it will not be put to use now, but some of it, especially urea, could still be helpful because it helps boost productivity, and the sooner it arrives, the more the likelihood of our farmers extricating themselves out of dependency on food aid. But there are indications that for every positive signal, there is an equally significant negative signal that's being sent from Addis. We'd rather have them be more pronounced on the positive signals and dispense with the negative ones. Thank you.